They say the greatest cruelty is delivered not by strangers, but by the hands you spent a lifetime holding. I was 78 years old. 78 years I had spent building things: a marriage, a legacy, and a company that employed thousands. Yet, on a cold Tuesday in November, I learned that all of it meant nothing if you forgot to keep the keys to your own life. I had been out for my weekly checkup, just a routine visit to the cardiologist. When I pulled my old sedan into the driveway of the house I built 40 years ago, everything looked normal. The porch light was flickering. The rose bushes I'd planted were dormant, dusted with frost. But when I reached for the handle, my hand stopped. My key, the heavy brass one with the distinct groove I could recognize in the dark, didn't fit the deadbolt. I tried again. The key scraped uselessly against the cold, shiny metal. They had changed the locks. It was a professional job. A new stainless steel digital lock sat where the old tumbler used to be. Not just a temporary measure. This was deliberate, permanent, a declaration. I didn't knock immediately. I stood there, the winter air biting at the exposed skin on my wrists, watching my own reflection in the polished glass of the front door. I felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the icy realization that I was now an intruder, a ghost haunting his own threshold. The house, my home, the place where my wife passed, where I watched my son, Robert, take his first steps. It was no longer mine. It belonged to the lock and the person holding the code. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and called Robert. He answered on the third ring. His voice was rushed, clipped, the sound of a man annoyed by a minor inconvenience. "Dad, I'm in a meeting. This better be quick." "The front door, Robert," I said, my voice steady, perhaps too steady. I tasted dust on my tongue. "The key doesn't work. What happened to the locks?" There was a pause, a significant heavy silence, where the son calculated the risk of his disrespect. "Oh, that," he finally said, letting out a heavy sigh, as if I were the difficult one. "Yeah, we upgraded the security system, Dad. Standard procedure. For insurance." "Insurance? You didn't tell me, Robert. You changed the locks on my house." "Our house, Dad. Technically my house now. Didn't the lawyers finalize the deed transfer last month? Look, the new alarm system is complicated. We didn't want you messing it up. I'll bring you a spare key card next Sunday at lunch." My fingers tightened around the useless brass key, embedding the teeth into my palm. Sunday. He intended to leave me stranded, locked out of my own home for 6 days. He treated me like a forgetful child who couldn't be trusted with the controls, relegating me to waiting for a scheduled visitation time. "Robert, where am I supposed to sleep tonight?" I asked. "Well, the guest apartment by the lake is still empty. Or maybe try your sister Martha's place. We need privacy here, Dad. You're constantly walking in and out. This transition requires boundaries." Boundaries. He had drawn a boundary with steel, brick, and cold technology. He had taken the last sacred space of my independence and declared it off limits. I could hear the smile in his voice, the smug, entitled satisfaction of a man who believed he had won the final game of succession. I thought about screaming. I wanted to smash the phone against the door, demanding immediate entry. I wanted to remind him that I was the man who had bought the land, built the foundation, and paid every mortgage payment until the day I foolishly signed the deed over to him in good faith 2 years ago. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. Instead, something cold and crystalline settled in my chest. It wasn't despair. It was clarity. I looked at the phone, and I did exactly what the title promises. I smiled. It was not a smile of amusement or acceptance. It was the taut, dangerous smile of a retired general recognizing the field of battle for the first time in years. Thank you for clarifying the boundary, Robert, I said, my voice now dropping to a tone he hadn't heard since he was caught trying to embezzle petty cash from the company canteen in college. It was the tone of executive authority. I understand completely now. I hung up before he could respond. I stood back from the porch and surveyed the house one last time. 4 bedrooms, 3 fireplaces, a library full of books I would never touch again. They were trying to erase me. This wasn't just about a key. This was about dignity. They saw me as inert, a fading signature on a will, someone whose decisions were history, whose presence was a nuisance. They had forgotten one crucial detail. They had taken the house, yes, they had transferred the deed. But the house, for all its emotional value, was merely a structure. The company, the actual engine of my life and fortune, was a different beast entirely. I walked back to my car, my joints aching from the shock, and the cold realization that I was now homeless, dependent on the charity of others until Sunday. I drove slowly, not towards my sister's or the empty guest apartment Robert suggested, but towards the city center. I had spent my entire life building Sterling Dynamics. It wasn't just a business, it was an empire built on steel, software, and ruthlessness. I had officially stepped down as CEO 5 years ago, promoting Robert. I retained the title of Chairman Emeritus, a decorative role, everyone assumed, a ceremonial seat in the corner of the boardroom. Robert certainly assumed it was decoration. He believed he held 51% of the voting shares, and therefore ultimate control. That was the official public structure of the company. But years ago, when I founded the company, I had learned from observing the mistakes of other aging tycoons. Never surrender the emergency brake. Before I ever put a single share in Robert's name, I restructured the founding charter of Sterling Dynamics. I established a holding trust, a private, non-reporting entity called the Obsidian Trust, incorporated offshore, far from the prying eyes of the domestic accounting board. The Obsidian Trust held a non-voting, non-diluting class of shares, Class X, which constituted 49% of the company's equity, keeping Robert's official 51% majority intact. Crucially, the charter of the Obsidian Trust included a very specific clause, buried deep in the appendices, drafted by my most trusted corporate lawyer, Eleanor Vance, whom Robert had since fired for being too loyal to the old guard. That clause granted the sole fiduciary of the Obsidian Trust, which was me, Arthur Sterling, for life, the temporary unilateral authority to invoke Article 17, Section 3. Article 17, Section 3. The power of emergency executive reassumption. This provision allowed the fiduciary, in the event of demonstrable moral turpitude or actions detrimental to the founder's well-being, to temporarily reassign all executive functions, suspend all standing resolutions, and dismiss any existing C-suite personnel, including the CEO, without appeal for a period of 90 days. It was the nuclear button. I had drafted it decades ago, purely as a precaution against corporate raiders, never imagining the raider would be my own son. Robert, focused on the immediate power of the 51% voting stock and the daily earnings, never bothered to read the ancient charter documents he inherited. He only saw the surface. He saw an old man, shuffling papers, relying on him for a place to sleep and a key card on Sunday. He saw the house deed signed over. He saw his name on the company door. He did not see the Obsidian Trust. He did not see Article 17. He made a fatal error. He mistook my quiet retreat for total surrender. He confused kindness with weakness. As I drove, the anger dissolved, replaced by a cold, thrilling focus. They wanted to play the game of control? Fine. I would show them how control was truly exercised. I parked my car in an underground garage, 3 blocks from the Sterling Dynamics Tower. I checked into a modest, anonymous hotel under a fake name. I didn't need the warmth of my home yet. I needed absolute silence and a reliable internet connection. I called Eleanor Vance. She was still bitter about Robert letting her go, and fiercely loyal to me. Eleanor, I said, skipping the pleasantries, it's time. The locks on the house have been changed. Robert has initiated hostilities. Eleanor, a woman who understood corporate warfare better than anyone, didn't gasp or question. She simply asked, do you want to initiate a temporary suspension or full termination? A temporary suspension meant humiliation. Full termination meant annihilation. I looked out the window at the glittering cityscape, seeing the Sterling Dynamics logo gleaming atop the largest skyscraper, the building Robert currently occupied, feeling secure in his domain. Tonight, Eleanor, I said, pulling out the laptop I kept hidden for financial affairs Robert was unaware of. We do not seek mediation. We seek justice. And we seek to remind my son that authority is earned, not inherited. Understood, Arthur. Accessing the charter documents now. Do you have the necessary documentation ready for the swift filing of the temporary injunction and the immediate freeze of corporate assets? I have everything, I confirmed. And I want this filed tonight. By morning, when Robert arrives at the office, he will discover the meaning of executive authority. My hands were shaking slightly now, but not from fear or cold. It was the adrenaline of the imminent fight. I thought about Robert, sitting comfortably in my former chair, perhaps celebrating his victory of locking out his father. He thought he had ended my power with a key. He had simply given me the perfect, morally justifiable reason to activate the bomb I had planted 30 years ago. The humiliation of being locked out of the house was profound, but it was nothing compared to the quiet satisfaction of the move I was about to make. I opened the laptop. The screen light reflected in my eyes. The first step was contacting the board liaison, confirming the invocation of Article 17, Section 3. The second step was the transfer of the CEO position, effective immediately. The third step was the hardest but the most necessary, the official letter of dismissal. This house betrayal was not the end of my story. It was simply the opening scene of Robert's demise. I just needed to write the first email, the one that would start the domino effect. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and began to type the document that would fire my son from the family company. The night was just beginning. Bridge to Part 2. The screen glowed, illuminating the cold determination on my face. The execution had to be flawless. I knew the consequences of hesitation. I leaned forward, ready to initiate the cascade of corporate events that would reclaim not just my home, but my dignity. The question was, how far did I need to push the knife to ensure the lesson stuck? The cold night air felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Not just a breeze. It was the weight of 70 years of effort, thrown back at me by a thin piece of brass and steel. I drove away slowly. I didn't look back at the mansion. It was a beautiful house, filled with memories of a life that was now seemingly irrelevant. My wallet still worked. Marcus hadn't thought that far ahead yet, or maybe he believed he didn't have to. I found a cheap motel near the highway access point. It was anonymous, smelling faintly of stale smoke and cleaner. I laid my single suitcase on the bed. It wasn't the silk sheets of my master suite. It felt like exile. But the moment I closed that flimsy door, the shock left me. The confusion burned away. What remained was a frightening, cold clarity. Marcus didn't want the house for the mortgage value or the sentimental memories. He wanted it because he believed it confirmed that I was gone. He wasn't trying to steal a home. He was trying to usurp a dynasty. He assumed the house was the final indicator that the old man was finally senile enough to dispose of. If he could lock me out of my personal life, he thought the business would follow seamlessly. He had always been greedy, always impatient. I remembered the day I handed him the title of CEO. It wasn't a gift. It was a test, a stewardship. I retained the chairman emeritus role, a title Marcus openly mocked, but whose fine print he clearly never bothered to read. I sat on the edge of the cheap mattress and reached for the worn leather briefcase I always kept with me. It didn't hold clothes or toiletries. It held the truth of my life's work. Inside was a satellite phone and 3 sealed hard copy documents. They were my legacy defense system. I opened the first file. It was the company charter, Section 4. The clause was rarely mentioned, never used. It defined the powers of the chairman emeritus in the event of documented malfeasance or immediate threat to shareholder value. It wasn't just symbolic power, it was absolute. Under this clause, the chairman emeritus retained the sole executive authority to immediately terminate any company officer, including the chief executive officer, without board consultation, provided sufficient evidence was compiled and presented to the chief financial officer before 8:15 a.m. on the next business day. I read the text twice. My hands didn't shake. They were steady, focused. Marcus assumed I was a relic. He had forgotten I was the architect of the entire structure. I hadn't built a castle he could simply inherit. I had built a fortress with a secret trapdoor, designed specifically for reckless heirs. The humiliation at the door was necessary. It provided the indisputable cause and threat to personal and financial stability required by my own internal ethics review. He had changed the locks on my front door. I would change the locks on his executive office. I reached for the secure phone. It was time to call Charles Peterson, our family CFO for 40 years. He was 75, rigid, and loyal to the structure, not the people. He liked order. Marcus's impulsive lockout would be an offense to his sense of propriety. The phone rang twice before he answered. His voice was thick with sleep. "Arthur, do you know what time it is?" he grumbled. "It is the beginning of the end of Marcus's tenure, Charles. I need you to be completely silent about this conversation." I heard the rustle of sheets and the metallic clink of his bedside lamp being switched on. The tone shift was immediate. "What has happened? The markets are closed." "Marcus changed the locks on my house tonight, Charles. He denied me entry. He made it clear that he believes he is now the sole proprietor of my assets, personal and corporate." I let the silence hang there. I didn't need to explain the insult. Charles knew exactly what that meant for the stability of the company's public image. It was a massive liability. He did what?" Charles whispered, disbelief warring with professional fear. "He committed a reckless documented act of malfeasance against the founder and principal shareholder in a direct documented attempt to seize control of my assets." I kept the phrasing professional, surgical. This was business, not father-son drama. "I am invoking Section 4, Subclause B, Emergency Executive Termination." Charles inhaled sharply. "Arthur, you haven't touched that clause since the merger talks in '98. This is extreme. It is absolute." "It is necessary," I confirmed, my voice flat. "Marcus has proven tonight that he prioritizes immediate, crude personal power over the stable operation of the firm. He used the house as his training ground. The company is next." "What are your immediate instructions?" Charles asked, his voice now entirely professional. The sleepy grandfather gone. "I need you to meet me. Not at the office, not at my house. Meet me at the old annex building, the one still registered under the original LLC, the old paper filing vault. We meet at 1 a.m. Bring 2 copies of the executive termination paperwork, ready for immediate execution." 1 hour, Charles confirmed. "The clock starts now. Do you have physical possession of the original founder's ledger?" "It is here, in the briefcase," I assured him. That ledger held the final signature authorization needed for full legal enactment. I hung up the phone. I stood up and smoothed my rumpled shirt. I was still wearing the same clothes I had been locked out in. My expensive shoes were dusty from the motel parking lot. I looked at my reflection in the cheap speckled mirror. I saw an old man who had been heartbroken just an hour ago. But beneath the disappointment, I saw the chairman, the founder, the wolf who had built the entire empire from dust. I wasn't tired anymore. The betrayal had fueled a terrifying cold energy. I pulled the rest of the relevant documents out of the case. The access codes for the immediate lockdown of Marcus's digital assets, the instructions for freezing his corporate accounts, and the notice to revoke his security clearance effective 00.01 a.m. I had planned this scenario 30 years ago when the company first went public and every consultant warned me about entitled children. Marcus was exactly the disaster I had foreseen, and tonight I was ready to clean up the mess he had created. I walked out of the cheap motel room and drove towards the industrial annex. The city was quiet, dark, and utterly unaware that one of its largest corporate entities was about to undergo a silent, ruthless coup orchestrated by the old man they thought was ready for the scrap heap. I would meet Charles, we would sign the paperwork, and then I would make the final call to the IT security chief, the one who worked on the night shift, the one who only answered to me. He would be instructed to change the electronic access credentials, lock the servers, and send the termination notice via registered digital mail. When Marcus woke up tomorrow, he wouldn't be walking into his executive office. He would be walking into a closed-door investigation. The locks on my door had only locked me out. My actions tonight would lock him out of his entire future. I gripped the steering wheel tight, feeling the rough leather under my palms. The smile finally returned to my face, cold, thin, and entirely without mercy. The paperwork was ready. The signatures were waiting. I just needed the clock to strike midnight. The hotel room was too sterile, too quiet. I couldn't stand the silence of the city outside. Knowing the silence inside my own house was deafening, a silence enforced by a steel deadbolt and a key I no longer held. I pulled out the leather satchel. This wasn't my usual briefcase. This was the contingency bag. I had assembled it 15 years ago, right after the first time Richard had argued with me about an acquisition deal. I saw the hunger in his eyes even then. I knew, deep down, that when the time came, he would choose the company's profit margin over his own father's dignity. Inside the satchel was the binder, thin, red, labeled only with a date. It contained the emergency resolution signed when I officially became chairman emeritus. Richard had laughed at the title. He called it my retirement trinket. He never read the fine print. The fine print gave the chairman emeritus the right to call an immediate emergency executive session of the board. No notice required. And most critically, it allowed me, in cases of documented gross negligence or willful misconduct detrimentally affecting the corporate image, to issue a temporary suspension and permanent termination of any officer below the rank of CEO. Richard was Chief Operating Officer, the perfect target. My hands didn't shake as I opened my encrypted corporate laptop. I felt a cold clarity I hadn't known since my wife died. The sadness was still there, but it was buried under layers of corporate armor. This wasn't personal anymore. This was business. Betrayal is bad business. I drafted the first email. Subject: immediate executive session call. It was addressed to the 5 other non-executive board members, the ones Richard had tried to sideline over the years. They knew the score. They knew Richard was a bully when I wasn't watching. I attached the documentation required to validate the emergency call. The process was swift, ruthless, and entirely legal. I didn't need their approval to suspend him. I just needed to inform them that it was done. At 11:37 p.m., I hit send. The digital paperwork, validated by time-stamped security tokens I still controlled, flooded the system. Richard's corporate credit cards, the ones he used to pay for his absurd weekend golf trips, and the renovations he was planning for my house, were now declined. every single one. His access codes to the main server, his C-suite privileges, his secure company phone line, all gone. Disabled instantly by the automated protocol I had set up years ago, specifically for this scenario. I had designed the system to be irreversible for 3 business days, long enough for the damage to set in, long enough for him to realize the full weight of his folly. I remember thinking about how proud I used to be, watching him climb the corporate ladder. I had given him every advantage. I taught him the value of a handshake, the importance of integrity. He took those lessons and sharpened them into weapons, aiming them right back at me. I moved to the final hardest step, the termination notice. It was a standard HR document, but the reason section held the real weight. Reason for termination: gross misconduct, violation of the company's integrity and ethics policy, undermining the trust of the chairman emeritus, leading to irreconcilable loss of confidence in leadership. I made sure not to mention the locks or the house in the official document. This had to look clean, professional, and unchallengeable in court. But Richard would know. The timing was the evidence. I signed the electronic document. The system confirmed the successful transmission to his personal email address, the one he thought was private, and to HR, which was instructed to send the physical certified mail package first thing in the morning. It was done. My son, the COO, the heir apparent, was professionally erased with a few keystrokes, just hours after he physically locked me out of my own life. I leaned back, the fluorescent light of the hotel room buzzing overhead. I felt relief, yes, but mostly emptiness. The victory tasted metallic, like copper on the tongue. I hadn't just fired my son. I had incinerated the career I had built for him. I had stripped him of the only identity he truly respected, that of a powerful executive. The phone rang at 11:49 p.m. It was Richard. The caller ID screamed his name. I let it ring 5 times before I picked up. I cleared my throat, making sure my voice was level, emotionless. "Hello, Richard," I said. My voice sounded like gravel. "What in the hell is this, Dad? My access codes are failing. My corporate card just froze at the gas station. Is this some kind of sick joke?" His voice was sharp, laced with genuine terror, wrapped in aggressive entitlement. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't mention the house, only the money. "It is not a joke, Richard," I replied, keeping my breathing steady. "You should have received the official documentation by now. Read the attachments. I'm reading it. It says termination. Are you senile? You can't do this. I run the company." "No, Richard. I owned the company. You ran the day-to-day operations. There is a difference that you failed to appreciate." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "You have been terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct." "Misconduct? What misconduct? I hit budget targets. We posted record profits last quarter. The stock is up." "The definition of misconduct extends beyond simple quarterly returns, Richard." I allowed a sliver of the personal to slip into my tone, just enough for him to connect the dots. "You seem to think that respect is optional, Richard. That decency is a loophole you can exploit. You locked me out of the home I built. You thought I was weak. You thought I was disposable." His breathing became ragged over the line. He started stumbling over his words, the panic finally breaching his arrogance. "That was the house, Dad. That has nothing to do with the firm. That's personal." "Everything is related, Richard. If you cannot be trusted with the keys to your own family's home, why on earth would I trust you with the keys to a multinational corporation?" I heard him slam something down. A chair, perhaps. "You've ruined me. You can't just walk away from this. This is my life, Dad. My inheritance." "No, Richard. This was your job. You confuse the two. The inheritance is currently being reassessed, along with the ownership of the house you so carelessly barricaded." I kept the sentence short. I gave him no room to argue, no target to aim his rage at. Your severance package details will follow the standard policy, pending a complete audit of your corporate accounts. I knew there would be no severance. The gross misconduct clause voids the entire package. But I wanted him to think he had one last thing to lose. I will see you in court, father, you old fool. You will regret this. I doubt it, Richard. Good night. I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for his reply. I sat there for a long time, watching the hotel television muted on the news channel. The red binder lay open on the desk. Richard would spend the next few weeks trying desperately to challenge the termination. He would hire lawyers. He would try to charm the board. But the corporate structure was sound. I had built it too well. The locks on the main house were still changed. I was still effectively homeless. But Richard was now a liability, broke, desperate, and officially fired. The house was phase two. The company was the foundation. I looked down at the room key card in my hand. Tomorrow, I would check out and move somewhere safer, quieter. Richard would be unpredictable now. He thought he was playing Monopoly with the family estate. He just found out I was still the banker, and I had the power to declare him bankrupt at midnight. A genuine smile, small and cold, finally touched my lips. He had changed the locks. I had changed his future. Now, I needed to secure the next step, dealing with the legal deed of the property itself. The fight for the house was only just beginning, and I needed my affairs in perfect order before the inevitable storm broke over Richard's head. I closed the red binder. The night's work was done, but the real confrontation awaited the dawn. The morning broke pale and cold, even through the heavy drapes of the hotel room. I had slept barely 2 hours, but I didn't feel tired. I felt surgically removed from the world I knew. I sat in the chair, watching the corporate phone they had delivered at 3 a.m. It remained silent. Mark was never an early riser, unless he had a tea time. He would not see the email until he walked into the office or tried to walk in. The truth was, I hadn't just fired him from the CEO position. I had revoked all his access. His keycard to the main office, his access code to the server, his corporate credit line, the fuel card for the company car, all invalid before the sun rose. I knew the moment he would realize. Not when he read the email, but when he swiped his card and the green light stayed stubbornly red. That would be the panic. At 8:14 a.m., the dedicated line rang. It wasn't Mark. It was Margaret, our chief financial officer. She was calm, professional, and slightly terrified. "Mr. Peterson," she said, "I received the mandate. It is signed and authenticated. Are we proceeding immediately?" "We are, Margaret," I confirmed. My voice was low, steady. "Has it secured all network points Mark previously administered?" "Yes, sir. He is currently locked out of the executive server. His payroll status has been reverted to basic salary suspension pending board review, as per the 1985 agreement. We rerouted the client meetings to you and John in sales." "Good. Did he arrive at the office yet?" "He has, sir. Security called 5 minutes ago. He is currently arguing with the lobby guard about his key card failing." I closed my eyes for a moment. This was the most public humiliation a man who valued appearance above all else could face. It was ugly. It was necessary. "Margaret," I said, "send a junior associate down with a sealed envelope. It contains the official termination letter and a full printout of the Executive Trust Authority. Tell them not to engage. Just deliver it and walk away." "Understood, Mr. Peterson. I will ensure smooth continuity. Welcome back, sir." Welcome back. A strange phrase for someone who had just torn down the central pillar of his own legacy. I hung up, feeling the tremor in my hand. It was one thing to make the cold decision at midnight. It was another to watch the dominoes fall in the light of day. The phone rang again 5 minutes later. This time, it was Mark. His voice was not angry yet. It was thick with confusion, laced with disbelief. Dad, what the hell is this? I just got some bizarre legal document from Margaret's assistant. It says I'm suspended, effective immediately. Are you kidding me? Is this some joke because of the house key? He still thought it was about the house key. He still measured my pain in minor inconveniences, not catastrophic betrayal. It's no joke, Mark, I said. It is entirely effective. And it has nothing to do with the house key. The house key was the symptom. This is the cure. The cure? Dad, this is the company. My company. We built this. You can't just erase 20 years of work because you had a bad night. I didn't erase 20 years, Mark. You did. You erased 20 years of respect, partnership, and trust when you stood on the other side of that door and changed the locks on your father. He laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You're really going to throw away a 9-figure business over a petty spat? This is insane. I'm calling our lawyers. This is wrongful termination. I have a contract. You had a contract, Mark. You signed the amended agreement in 2008, right after the recession when we restructured the debt. I paused, letting the silence stretch. I had rehearsed this part in my head 1,000 times since the lockout. You remember the emergency continuity clause, Mark? The one that centralized all executive authority into the holder of the Class A, voting only shares. The shares nobody talks about? His breathing hitched. The confusion was draining away, replaced by genuine cold dread. That was just boilerplate, Dad, for a hostile takeover scenario. It was the safeguard, Mark, the safety net I installed to protect the company from any single individual, even myself, should they become compromised, incapacitated, or demonstrably unfit to lead. Unfit? He shouted. The panic was taking over now. I grew the profit margin by 15% last quarter. And you locked your own father out of his home, I stated simply. That demonstrated a lapse in judgment, character, and integrity that the board, through the executive trustee, cannot ignore. The executive trustee is you, he whispered, finally catching on. Technically, the executive trustee is the entity established in 1985, I corrected him. And yes, I hold 100% of the Class A shares needed to activate the mandate of immediate executive transfer. It's non-negotiable, non-appealable, and you signed the document agreeing to it. I heard a click on the line. He was likely pacing the parking lot of the building he couldn't enter. You can't do this, he pleaded, the arrogance entirely gone. Think about your legacy, Dad. Think about the grandchildren. What will I tell James? That Grandpa destroyed his college fund out of spite? Ah, the grandchildren card. Predictable, hollow, and worn out. You will tell James the truth, Mark. You will tell him that dignity is worth more than a profit margin. You will tell him that actions have consequences. And you will tell him that the only person who destroyed your college fund was the one who prioritized his entitlement over his filial duty. I felt the immense weight of that conversation. It was a 20-year relationship, finalized in 5 painful minutes. You have until 5 p.m. today to return the corporate laptop, the company phone, and the executive parking pass, I instructed him, my voice flat. Mr. Evans, my lawyer, will be in touch regarding the settlement package, which will reflect your statutory minimum and nothing more. Goodbye, Mark. I hung up before he could launch into another desperate plea. I muted the phone immediately. I didn't have time for grief. I had a company to run and loose ends to secure. My next call was to Mr. Evans. The lawyer had been working all night, ensuring the paperwork was airtight. The business transition is complete, Mr. Evans. Zero resistance from the board. They recognized the authority immediately. Excellent, Robert. You handled that like the general you always were. Now, regarding the house. The house is the next step, I confirmed. I need you to begin proceedings immediately to reclaim the property. Mark and Sarah have no legal ownership claim, only permissive tenancy linked to his employment contract. Since the contract is void, the tenancy is void. It should be a swift eviction process, but they might fight it to drag things out. Let them fight it, I said, looking out at the city skyline. The pain in my chest was dull now, replaced by grim purpose. I want every single legal avenue pursued. I want them to understand that the place they thought was theirs, the one they used to humiliate me, is merely a corporate asset that I require back. I will file the notices this afternoon. They will be served within 48 hours. Where are you staying, Robert? I need to know your safe contact details. I gave him the hotel information. And Mr. Evans, one more thing. My will. I need it completely redrawn. Everything pertaining to Mark's inheritance, any trusts, any financial gifts, I need it all revoked, reassigned, and placed into a non-discretionary foundation dedicated to elder care and community housing. Mr. Evans paused. That is a significant change, Robert. Are you absolutely certain? I am certain, I affirmed. Mark showed me clearly that he values assets only in terms of what he can take, not what he can build or maintain. He cannot inherit a fortune only to use it to buy his way back into a life he forfeited through disrespect. I spent the next several hours on conference calls, stabilizing the executive team. I was not planning to run the company long term. I was planning to stabilize it, put a trustworthy structure in place, and then appoint an external professional CEO, someone who owed Mark nothing. By late afternoon, I received a torrent of angry, venomous texts from Mark and several hysterical, tear-filled calls from Sarah, his wife. I blocked all of them. I was done negotiating with people who viewed my existence as a complication to their lifestyle. I received one final cryptic message from Margaret, the CFO, just before I was about to call it a day. The associate delivered the papers to Mark at 11 a.m. He left the parking lot quickly. However, Sarah arrived at the office shortly after and is now demanding to speak to you. She is currently refusing to leave the lobby until she is given an explanation for why her husband was financially murdered and her life savings are gone. Sarah was the catalyst. She was the one who had encouraged Mark's arrogance for years. She was the one who had suggested they handle the old man by locking me out. She thought her indignation was leverage. She thought I cared about a scene in the lobby. I took a deep breath. I needed to finish this, not just legally, but personally. I called Margaret back. Tell Mrs. Peterson that I will not be speaking with her, I instructed. But you may relay one message, Margaret. Tell her to go home. Tell her that I own the walls, the furniture, and the land she is currently standing on, and that she will be hearing from my legal team regarding her immediate eviction from the property I worked my entire life to pay for. Understood, Mr. Peterson, Margaret said softly. I will relay that exact message. It sounds like she might be spending tonight in the hotel too. I ended the call, the feeling of cold finality settling over me. The company was secured. The eviction notice was filed. The future was unwritten, but my present was now about reclaiming everything they tried to steal. I just needed to survive the inevitable explosion when Sarah finally realized that the lock on the door didn't just mean a change of key, it meant a change of life. The early morning was unnaturally quiet. I sat in the hotel lobby, sipping weak coffee, watching the city wake up. Mark had given me the worst night of my life, but I felt a strange, steel-cold clarity I hadn't felt in years. There was no confusion left, only action. I had been waiting for Margaret's call. She was the only person who understood the true structure of the company. She knew about the founder's clause, the golden share, the ultimate veto authority that resided solely with me, and which I had sworn never to use. Until now. When the phone buzzed, I answered immediately. Mr. Peterson, Margaret's voice was crisp. professional, entirely without emotion. The papers were executed at 80 Ghost AM sharp. The board has been informed. The vote was unanimous, legally mandated by Article 4, Section B. I closed my eyes briefly. It was done. And Mark's access? I asked. Revoked. All company credit cards cancelled. Executive email deleted. The security team is ensuring he is escorted off the property if he attempts entry today. I simply said, "Thank you, Margaret." It wasn't vengeance I felt. It was surgical removal of a cancer. Mark had poisoned the house. He was now poisoning the corporation. I had to protect my life's work. I walked out of the hotel and decided to handle the next humiliation personally. I was not going to hide. I drove straight to the company headquarters first. I bypassed my old parking spot, Mark's spot now, and walked straight to the office I hadn't occupied in 5 years. The CFO, a nervous man named David, met me at the door. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Sir, are you sure about this?" he whispered, glancing nervously at the silent secretaries. "Perfectly sure, David," I replied, my voice steady. "Mark Peterson is dismissed, effective immediately. I am resuming temporary executive control until a new CEO can be properly vetted. I need all financial audits from the last 6 months, and I need access to Mark's personal expense reports, effective yesterday." David nodded dumbly, terrified but obedient. That was the thing about absolute power. It commanded obedience. I saw the looks from the staff. They knew the tension. They knew the rumors. They saw the founder, the man who built the empire from zero, back in the chair. I didn't stay long. I had done what needed to be done for the company. Now I had to deal with the family. I was in a meeting reviewing corporate legal documents when my personal cell phone began to ring incessantly. It was Mark. I ignored the first 10 calls. I let him sweat. When I finally picked up, I didn't say hello. I just waited. "What have you done?" Mark's voice was raw, breaking, laced with disbelief and fury. He was screaming. "My access badge didn't work. My car was towed. The security guard said I was terminated. What in the hell is wrong with you?" "There is nothing wrong with me, Mark," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. I sounded like I was discussing the weather. "There is everything wrong with you. This is illegal. You can't just fire the CEO. I run this company. It's the family legacy." "No, Mark. I run the company. You were delegated the responsibility. Delegation can be revoked. The family legacy is built on respect and integrity. When you locked your own father out of his home, you proved you have neither." His rage was sputtering, turning into desperate pleading. "You are destroying me. Everything I have is tied to that salary. How am I supposed to pay the mortgage? The new locks cost a fortune. Think about Sarah and the kids." I thought about them, Mark. I thought about them the moment I stood on the street last night, watching you turn off the porch light. That house is fully paid for. There is no mortgage. You were using the company to fund your lavish lifestyle while pretending to be broke. I knew the truth from the audit reports I had just skimmed. Mark was drowning in debt, leveraging the family name and company assets. Locking me out was a desperate move to seize the house before the banks caught up. You were trying to steal my home and my retirement, Mark. I simply terminated your ability to steal. Anything else? I hung up. I didn't give him a chance to respond. My next step was to go back to the house. I wasn't going to beg entry again. I drove my old truck, the one Mark always sneered at, to the front door. The expensive reinforced steel door he had installed was still mocking me. The new digital lock shone aggressively in the daylight. I didn't approach it. I simply sat in my truck and called the most discreet, high-end locksmith in the city. "I need immediate access to my residence," I told the locksmith. "My son changed the security system and the locks against my will. I have the deeds and the police standing by." I didn't need the police, but the mention accelerated their response time. Within 20 minutes, two men in sharp black uniforms arrived with specialized tools. They confirmed my identity, looked at the deed, and got to work. Mark's expensive high-tech security was reduced to scrap metal in 5 minutes. I watched the brass tumbler fall onto the polished concrete of the driveway. It made a small, satisfying clink. It was the same sound my old key ring made when I dropped it that terrible night. When the heavy steel door swung open, I didn't rush in. I just stood on the porch, feeling the afternoon sun on my back. The house was cold. Mark's presence was everywhere. Expensive, new, impersonal furniture. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a staged rental property. I walked directly to the kitchen counter. There, resting against the sugar bowl, was a folded piece of paper. A note from Mark's wife, Lisa. "Dad, we need to talk. This isn't fair. We are family. You can't just ruin us over a misunderstanding about the keys. Mark will return them. Just please, call him back." A misunderstanding about the keys. They still didn't get it. They thought this was a petty family squabble over a piece of property. They didn't realize this was about the soul of a relationship and the integrity of a business. I picked up the note. I felt nothing for her, only a distant pity. She was complicit in her husband's greed. I walked upstairs, straight to my master bedroom, the one they had already started clearing out, preparing for their renovations. I saw the empty closet, the stripped walls, but my safe was still there, hidden behind the painting. I opened it. My important documents were safe. The original will, the corporate bylaws, and the personal trust documents I had established for my granddaughter, Sophie. Ah, Sophie. The leverage. Mark had convinced me, years ago, to make him the primary executor of Sophie's trust fund, claiming it would streamline the management for her eventual college years. He had threatened to complicate that fund, to block her access unless I complied with his demands regarding the house. He thought he had me cornered. He didn't know that the golden share wasn't my only secret power. When I established Sophie's trust, I included a clause that allowed the original grantor, me, to name an entirely new trustee if the current executor was found guilty of gross negligence, conflict of interest, or emotional coercion against the grantor or beneficiary. Firing Mark from the company was just the first step. It cut off his income and his pride. The next step would cut off his power to hurt the people I loved. I sat down on the bare mattress frame, feeling the silence of the house surround me. I had reclaimed my property. I had reclaimed my company. But I had lost my son. Justice felt heavy. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt exhausting. I needed rest. But first, I needed to make one more phone call. I picked up the phone again, dialing Margaret's direct line. "Margaret, I need one more urgent document drafted," I said. "Yes, Mr. Peterson?" "The Peterson Grandchild Trust. I need a formal revocation of Mark Peterson as executor, effective immediately. And I need to name Sophie herself, effective on her 18th birthday next month, with you as temporary legal guardian until then." Margaret paused, a rare moment of surprise. "That's a very substantial change, Mr. Peterson. The tax implications alone." "I don't care about the tax implications," I interrupted calmly. "I care about the principle. And Margaret, please ensure that document is hand-delivered to Mark's lawyers before the end of the day." "Consider it done, sir." I hung up, looking out the window at the setting sun. The house was mine again, but it felt wrong, empty. The damage was deeper than locks and deeds. I knew Mark would fight the trust fund revocation. That was the last piece of power he had left. He wouldn't go quietly. This was merely the end of the first battle. The war for my family and for my peace was just beginning. I leaned back against the wall, utterly alone in the expensive house I had saved from thieves. I had reclaimed my dignity, Now, I just needed to learn how to live with the cost.